good evening and welcome to your view dialogue tonight, where we're going to be talking about the budget, a frank dialogue on the economy overall, but of course using the budget as our starting point, given that today was a big day where the Minister of Finance was telling the country how he's going to be distributing the resources. But also the big question is, how does this budget reflect on what was said at the State of the Nation? So we've got guests around the table here, and of course in the audience who are going to give me a sense of what they think of the budget. We're going to start by just your overall impression of the budget. Tessa Dooms, welcome. And then, of course, Philip Villagas, also from National Union of Mine Workers, will introduce the others as the evening goes. Let's start with you, Tessa. Overall, you do give the minister good marks, because it looks like the markets are happy. It looks like the trend has strengthened, you know, and etc. So there seems to be a narrative that says this was the best he could do.
So I think it would give him good marks in two respects. One is the cost savings measures that he's put in, and that he's been quite bold about saying that the state needs to look at issues around corruption, it needs to look in the ways in which it's spending, and it needs to rethink that before we go back to the taxpayer and say to the taxpayer, you need to put in more. So I think taxpayers were very relieved that the burden wasn't squarely placed on them this time, as it's been in previous budget speeches, and so I think that would be a very big plus. But I think there were also some expenditures that were questionable. I think around the SOEs particularly, there are eyebrows to be raised about the amount of money going there. But I think the point where it was really kind of thin was on social spending, in terms of what are those returns on those investments that we're making into social spending. Again, we always hear that those are the biggest line items, but we don't really always know where that's going to. And so more detail on what those investments actually yield for the economy would have been welcomed.
Okay, all right. We'll come back to you now for more detail on that. Does it feel like as the union, some unions saying that this was a declaration of war and dismissing the whole budget as a pro-business or pro-bourgeois budget? What's your view?
No, thank you very much, Tabane. Honestly speaking, the expectation of us as leadership of the working class, we thought we'll get a meaningful roadmap insofar as how to grow the economy. But if you listen to the narratives like you're saying, you only find, to me, this is more to do with lip service than actions. I can cite two examples. The industry I'm leading, we have got mines which are put under care and maintenance, and we have got companies in construction that are definitely don't understand even whether they are coming or going. We have been listening, aiming to hear what are the actions to resuscitate, because from where we are sitting, numbers from construction, energy, and mining made this economy of the country to be where it is today. But today, ever since he took over upon return on the portfolio of being Minister of Finance, the language he's speaking is very French. And when you talk about savings by disregarding the sitting agreement out of the collective bargaining for public servants, to us it's a no-go area. Remember, the little that we get is not enough for our social needs. And if you say you want to stop it, then it means you want us to suffocate. In simple terms, that's why we said, he who pays the piper plays the tune.
And this came as a total surprise. It's not something around which you are consulted or lobbied.
I think some of the comrades whom I know, they might be in pains as we speak now. They might be listening now, but very in pains, because we need to go to membership and explain this.
Looks like the whole idea of being in alliance with the ruling party is really just not working.
Can you come back to that?
We'll come back. All right. Let's go to the audience just here. Let's quick open us in terms of your own overall understanding.
Okay, JJ, this was a complete disaster for South Africa. I will explain what I'm talking about, yes.
Complete disaster.
We are in the worst post-apartheid economic crisis. Our GDP per capita has been declining for 5 consecutive years. We now have an unemployment crisis with 10.4 million people. We've got a poverty crisis. We've got an inequality crisis. The budget said nothing about addressing those issues. That's the first thing. The budget will now implement, it is forecast 1.3% growth over the next 3 years. But over the past 10 years, the government has overestimated the growth in the economy. So my prediction is that there will be far less than 1.3% growth over the next 3 years. This means that we're going to have 3 more years of declining GDP per capita. Now, on top of that, we're going to have austerity measures of 150 billion rands. The austerity measures will reduce the growth that they forecast to about 0% over the next 3 years. And what we're going to see is an increase in unemployment to about 12 million people. We're going to see 8 years of declining GDP per capita by the end of 2022. And finally, on the issue of the wage bill, I agree with the COSATU that this is a declaration of war on the working people of South Africa, because at the last budget in October, he said, I will go to the Public Sector Bargaining Council and talk about this matter of the wage bill. Now, for you to come to the Public Sector Bargaining Council the day before the budget, it is reckless and disrespectful, and it's someone who doesn't take their job seriously. And I think as South Africans, we have to reject what they've done. And I believe that this austerity measures will not be implemented. And the final thing I want to say is that the national budget does not work like a household budget. The reason for that is that in your household budget, there's an independence between your spending, JJ, and your expenditure. In the national budget, there is no such independence. So when the government cuts spending, it reduces growth. So the analogy that is appropriate is that when you reduce spending as an individual, your salary goes down. So what this budget is going to do, it's going to kill all prospects of growth that we could have had in the economy.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Killing all prospects of growth. So no surprises that our growth targets are always revised by other international bodies, whether it be rating agencies or the World Bank and so on. Your view there, Lee?
I've said to you before, JJ, that our current finance minister is monumentally macroeconomically incompetent. And I think this budget proves it. Number one, South Africa has an aggregate demand problem. So we don't have enough demand in the economy to actually grow the economy. And there was nothing that I saw in this budget that speaks about how we're going to stimulate demand. That's the first thing. This is why I'm wearing black. I'm in mourning.
Oh my God. The issue of taxation, you mean that by keeping it steady, wasn't that a move in the right direction?
So what he did actually was introduce, and it's been happening for a few years, was introduce what we call fiscal retrenchment, right, in terms of government spending. Now, he does this in the context of a recession. All that means is that this economy is not going to grow. So I am in total agreement with my colleague Utuma that this is the worst possible outcome for South Africans. We are not going to see growth. We're not going to see jobs. And, you know, I always say that this economy is still an apartheid economy, where you will remember that Verwoerd actually said, the white man will always be boss, black people will always be hewers of wood and drawers of water. And there's nothing that has been done over the last 25 years to fundamentally restructure the economy. And you cannot grow an economy that was designed to exclude the majority by doing what we are doing now. So black people will continue to suffer. And then the second thing that absolutely upsets me as a woman is that there was nothing in this budget that fundamentally speaks to the plight of women in terms of the fact that we remain, in terms of the industrial color bar, the least paid, the most unemployed, the most exploited. And there's been nothing in this budget that actually addresses the plight of women, the plight of the youth unemployed. There's nothing in this budget that speaks about how we're going to develop our population in order to compete on the global scale. I didn't see allocations towards human capital development as a country. So I am in mourning. I think that we seriously are in a situation where our government has declared war on its citizenry.
All right. We're going to carry on after the break to hear some more from our audience and panelists to tell us what they think. It looks like mixed reaction so far. Tessa Doomsie is saying he's giving some small marks here and there, but Dumat Kovule saying it's a total disaster. And the union saying it's indeed a declaration of war. So we hear more after the break. Stay tuned to our dialogue here on the budget tonight. Come back to your view, frank dialogue on the budget tonight as we try to understand its implications for our economy, its implications for the future of our country. There must be a silver lining somewhere in this budget, but I'm not telling you what to say about it. Over to you.
Yeah, no, evening, JJ.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
For me, this budget it needs to be understood in context of the SONA. Okay, so listening to the SONA of the president and listening to this budget and reading it today, it's almost like this budget is a reality check. Because that SONA was so different to this budget. Usually what should happen is that the SONA should go in conjunction with the budget. So whatever the president promises should actually be backed up with some sort of a financial backing within the budget. But that was lacking. I'll just give it a typical example.
I was saying it just de-linked from the SONA.
Yeah, the president hopped on about agriculture. I'm a farmer.
Yeah.
So, but when you look at what was allocated now, it's a meager amount. It's like 495 million. Okay,
Yeah.
so and agriculture is one of the critical sectors of our economy, and it contributes to employment, particularly within the rural economy. So when you only give it 495 million, it's actually basically like you're also not only declaring war on workers, also war on farmers. On farmers, because also land redistribution. How are you going to do it with such a meager budget?
Without money. But they said this without compensation, so maybe that's not in the budget.
But I really think that's just pie in the sky. That's not going to happen. But, JJ, just to say, I think for me, what also I found telling about our Minister of Finance is that he didn't actually hold departments accountable for underspending. Okay, so basically every year we have these lofty budgets that are allocated, but no one actually says what happens to the money that's underspent.
Yes.
I didn't even hear him not once mention to say and call the departments out that as of the previous budget, the ones that actually underspended and failed miserably. I mean, it's the police underspent, and you've got COGTA underspending, and these are all sort of very, critical municipal and provincial services. That is basically the core face of government delivery. So when you underspend 3.2 billion in terms of COGTA, what are you trying to say for the country? So I honestly feel like this budget, it's very contractionary in nature. And I agree 100% with Lee and Duma to say that it's actually going to spell disaster, because you cannot have austerity and then hope to grow the economy. Those two things are very contradictory. They're not aligned.
Yeah.
You need to spend in order to basically get the economy going again. So this budget for me was like a letdown, because I still feel that I don't know whose interest they're protecting here, but definitely not the citizens. Because when you're saying you're going to cut down the public sector wage bill, you're talking about nurses and teachers and police officers, and these people are critical to the functioning of the state. I didn't hear him say we're going to look at cutting down the executive management and the top heavy, because with our bureaucracy, our bureaucracy is very funny. Our bureaucracy is very funny. It's very top heavy. There are people sitting in offices and in suits. But when it comes to the people actually executing the services, that is where they want to cut. And that doesn't make sense, because already we've had the jobs being frozen because of, Pravin Gordhan basically saying we're not going to be hiring people within various SOEs, we're freezing certain things. But that then affects service, because how do you freeze certain posts but expect the government must deliver to its citizens? So I find this budget very contradictory, and I find it's a budget that's only going to lead us further into decline. Already, the economy is in trouble, but with this type of a budget, I think they don't quite get how we need innovative thinking in and around this. So it's almost like we keep on doing the same sort of neoliberal policies for the past 20 to 25 years, and we've seen that they've resulted in widening inequality, but we don't want to change it. Instead, what we're just doing, we're doubling down on it. And that's what's for me so bizarre on this. It's like it's not working.
It seems to me that then you need to change the driver. if the car is not going the right direction. But let's go to Hankangi. Business must be happy. I mean, the corporate taxes were not increased, and it seems like, at least from the point of view of the unions and others, that this is a pro-business budget. Do you share that sentiment, Hanki?
I think it was a very difficult balancing act for the minister. You must understand it in the context of what is happening in the country and what has happened in the past year. We characterized last year as the patient being in ICU. So what do you do when a patient is in ICU? What do? You don't wake up the patient and expect the patient to run. You first stabilize the patient. So last year was trying to stabilize the patient. At least now the patient is breathing. Let's try and find out how we can then get the patient to walk. So the minister, the rating...
I think we mustn't have high expectations about how a budget can be used as an instrument to actually radically, because this radical economic thing, it didn't come from the public. It came from the ruling party. They're the ones who said there's going to be radical economic transformation. Can't be radical by saying, oh, let's walk before we crawl and what have you done. That's not radical. It's gradual.
Yes, but I think that the context is important, because when you look at what's happening in the economy now, the country is losing jobs on a daily basis. Maybe you only see the ones that are in the newspapers of big companies. Small companies are closing on a daily basis.
Yes.
Moody's and other rating agencies are breathing on the neck of the minister. And if we get downgraded, it will be a disaster for the country. The inequalities is rising. So the minister was trying to balance that. So what do? Do you continue to tax people, to increase the VAT? The country can't afford the VAT increase. So what do? You try to then control the other part of the equation, because you've got income and expenditure. So you try to control the expenditure, because you cannot control the income. So let's understand it with that context. And I think he tried his level best.
Why do you say you can't control the income? Why is business not being taxed some more? Because the last time business had its corporate tax reduced, actually. It was about, I think it was about 5, I'm speaking out of correction, but it was about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. The reasoning was that so that it can stimulate them to invest, and so now they've been sitting on their pile of cash, not investing. In other words, they didn't come to the party. Since after the TRC, there was an argument against the wealth tax. They said, no, leave them alone. They'll come voluntarily. They have defied BEE. If you look at all the reports that are coming out, you must know those reports. Employment equity reports indicate that they're not interested in transformation. Then thirdly, an investment strike, essentially. I mean, whatever people may say. Now, how do you then, in that context, still keep corporate taxes unencumbered, unincreased, because you are saying you can't control the income? Please make me understand.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that if you look at the past few years, the taxes that have been collected keep on declining, which means that a lot of companies are closing down. So if companies are closing down, it means you cannot get the income. If people are retrenched, you can't get the tax income from individuals who have been retrenched. But also understand that the budget moved from the SONA and moved from what the president has been planning. The president spoke about attracting investment into the country. You do not attract investment into the country by increasing tax, corporate tax. So that is the balancing act I'm talking about, which is very, very complex.
All right. And let me come to your panel quickly. Your overall response is total disaster, or is that hyperbolic?
So I think what I was saying earlier about we don't know what the details are on the returns on when the investments are going into, right? So if you're looking at education, health, those investments are big investments, and those are the investments, for instance, in human capabilities. The problem is we don't know where those go to. We don't know how that translates into economic value, how that translates into people being able to have the jobs that they need and be skilled for the market. And that's where the breakages are. So, for instance, you say something about youth unemployment in the country. And there's this paragraph about youth unemployment, but there's absolutely no numbers, and there's no money that's set aside for that youth unemployment.
So how are we going to reverse that?
So we're told we're going to wait until the midterm budget, but the president already gave us 6 steps that he's already currently implementing. So there's a disjuncture between what we're investing and what we're going to get as a reward for that investment. So in that sense, it is weak on those kinds of things. But I don't think that's a total disaster. I don't think that there's been a reduction in the critical investments we need to make sure that people are getting the social protection that they need, that people are getting at least the investment into the education is there. Whether the system works or not is a completely different conversation. But on that front, I don't think he's done badly. I think where the question around the wage bill, I think that was disingenuous. I think Duma's completely right in saying that you can't come to the table the day before after having made an agreement and then renege on that agreement. But I think what we don't know about that is where the cuts are going to happen. And so I think he said something in there about nurses, about schools, because I don't think that that's where the cuts need to be. I don't think that's where the cuts are. I don't think that's what he said in the budget.
All right. I'll come back to that particular point. We're going to deal with the issue of unemployment separately. But briefly, before we go to a break, does this not send a wrong message to other employers that they can do this sort of reneging on agreements?
You see, the worst case scenario here, the minister made an analogy of an aloe forex. That particular tree, by its own nature, it doesn't need an overdose of its own life. That in itself is an acknowledgement that South Africa is in trouble, and he understands the trouble. The delivery of this democracy is the effort of the working people and the poor. And if you look at the anger level, these employers, I made it very clear that we wonder what language is this? Because if this language is the language that addresses us as people who are playing a role for government to be in place since 1994 to date, this is to undermine our intelligence. 4 critical points. If you only mention that we need to deal with the luxury trips and the cars, talking to those ministers and others, but when you come to the lower, hard-working, less paid individuals, you're critical to say we are going to cut on your salary. You are not making a principal statement. You are actual. Now, it tells you that, in fact, for how long are we going to sit here and look? But I want to respond to your question in closing. When you talk about the issue of the condition of the alliance, the alliance is not about the budget. This is
about what?
This is a revolution.
About the budget.
This is the revolutionary alliance that seeks to deal with issues of principle, not issues of individual. One of the panelists here spoke about competence insofar as the understanding of the situation we are facing.
In the macroeconomy,
You get it? Now, you have, it's critical. South Africa, everybody knows that in terms of minerals, we are number 1 in the continent. But you look at how poor are we. We are number 1 in the continent as well. The question is, he spoke about the issue of making sure that the young people are getting to school and all this. But then look at the system of the education we are giving.
What's got that to do with the alliance, man? The alliance seems not to have any influence
in
how the government approaches macroeconomy.
It does. That's why I'm saying, let us understand the founding principle of the alliance before we can put the alliance on individuals. The existence of the alliance, its principle spoke about RDP, not the neoliberal, not GIE. But every individual deployed immediately gets deployed.
They do their own thing.
Exactly my point.
Yeah, that's why the alliance is useless. Then.
No, it can't.
It cannot control its own members who are deployed.
It can't.
All right, we'll take a break. After the break, we carry on with our conversation. If you've just joined us, we're in a dialogue about the economy and about the finances, of course, as espoused by the Minister of Finance, and of course, heated discussions around the room here. Let's take a break now. Okay, good evening and welcome back to your view. We're going to be on this segment talking a lot about business. We're going to focus on business. What are the implications for business? There's an issue about downgrades, for example. There's an issue about small business and so on. Let's take a look at what the minister had to say in this regard.
Startups will ignite the economy. The tax system supports this in a number of ways, including a preferential small business tax regime, the VAT registration threshold, and the turnover tax. We'll review this to improve their effectiveness, whilst at the same time reducing the scope for frauds and abuse.
All right. Joining the panel now, Thabo Masombuka, who is the CEO of the Construction Construction Charter Council. He is late, and maybe it's because of the construction on the roads. How are you?
I'm good, and you, Judge.
Can you weigh in immediately on the issue of small business? Do you think that the budget is structured in a way that it recognizes the role of small business in stimulating the economy, creating jobs?
The minister had a difficulty to navigate himself with. He had to create hope in a hopeless situation, to say we need to do more with less. And we do appreciate the fact that he was seated with a paradigm of conflicting priorities. But in the process, we should welcome the fact that there is at least a channel and a pipeline to say, let's inject money into small businesses. But you see, to throw money into small businesses without creating a conducive environment for those small businesses to succeed. There's a report that says at least 80% of all small businesses that get registered, die within the first 3 years. Because there are a whole number of multiplying factors that hinders the ability of small business to thrive. So to throw money into CEDA and say and assume that by giving small businesses money we are solving the problem is not enough. You need to ensure that you remove, the environment, and part of it includes the tight and very congested regulatory environment that make it difficult for small businesses to gain access to markets. Hanki Tabane here will tell you that one of the key challenges facing black business in particular is not just the issue of access to finance. Yes, that is a critical aspect of it, but the issue is about access to market, which market are saturated and dominated by monopolies within big business, where they don't unlock opportunities to ensure that small businesses get access and they retain sustainability of those clients. So whilst we welcome the fact that there has been a level of injection into small business development agency, but we must remove the red tape and the regulatory constraint that still make it difficult for me and you to wake up tomorrow, start a business that will be able to sustain and thrive. Because it is true what the minister is saying. If you invest profoundly and successfully into a small business market, you are likely to create hope and ensure that people are able to then start their own businesses and employ other people. And you need to start training entrepreneurship in various institutions of higher learning, so that those graduates and products of colleges and universities don't look at the formal economy as a mechanism to absorb themselves.
Hanki, if I may bring you from a BBC's point of view, is it not time that now we should be in a position where we can take stock? We had a small business ministry established, 6 years ago, right? And it's presented as if now it's a brand new thing, right? We're not taking stock of what has happened. That's Ministry of Small Business, in its first or second year, rolled over 180 million rand. Rolled over when businesses are dying, right? So that's the first thing. Secondly, it doesn't seem to have achieved to change the habit of how government relates with the same small businesses. But still businesses are dying purely on not being paid on time by government or not being treated properly by government. Can you just give me a sense of what you think of what's happening there?
There's hope with the current minister, mainly because she has run an SOC, she has run a small business, so she talks from experience. So all these other issues about startups, support, she has lived through those. So from that point of view, I think she's at the right space. Perhaps she just needs to be supported. She's busy with a master plan for small business, because what is currently happening when the laws are passed by various departments, there's no consideration sometimes for small business. So it's important that the master plan then deals with those type of issues. But I think the big thing that we had expected...
Which means there was no plan for the last 5 years. It's arriving now. It's like the other minister didn't exist. They just put somebody there who had no clue of small business. So this one now is going to be the new leaf. That's what you're telling us.
Probably that's what the establishment of a master plan tells us. But I think for me, if you wanted to a small, relatively small but significant development, if the minister would have just said, I'm instructing all the government departments, all the SOCs to pay all the money that they are owing to small businesses, and I'm giving them 30 days. Whoever has not paid, I'm going to deal with that person. That person will have been dealt with.
They will just laugh, because that's what the president has been saying for the last 5 years in every rally where he can manage to talk about small business. We'll pay you on time. If that doesn't happen, there's going to be a big consequences. It doesn't happen, Hangi.
Yeah, I'm saying if that could happen, and then there are consequences, I think that will stimulate the activities in the economy. But the other issue that we thought was going to happen is the recapitalization of the National Empowerment Fund. The NEF is the only institution that was formed after Apartheid to specifically support and fund black businesses. But there's never been recapitalized. So how do you think you are going to grow the economy by supporting small business if you are not funding black business? So now black business have got nowhere to go when they're looking for funding.
Yeah, it sounds nice that you say it, but I mean, what do you guys talk to the president about in all these meetings if that particular issue was not squarely on the agenda? You think black business are not supported, there's an NEF, there's not been recapitalized. This probably was mentioned in your conference 3 years ago. And that's a conservative estimation. It must have been said many other times, right? I mean, is the BBC making that a program of action that when we interact with the president, these are the 3 or 4 top things we want to happen, so that then it doesn't get ignored like it was ignored in the budget?
Yes, this is always in the one of the issues that we discuss with the president, and the president has promised that it's going to be attended to. So we were expecting that the minister in the budget will then come up with a plan to say this is how much we're going to give to the NEF. But that has not happened, so we have to take up the issue again with the president.
But you see, JJ.
Yes.
But you see, JJ, you see the reason, one of the biggest limitations of the NEF and many other state-owned finance capitalization companies or institutions is that they are not able to recapitalize themselves because they are not investing in the right sectors of the economy. Meaning the investment strategy does not talk to that ROI, the return on investment.
So it ends up being like grant.
It ends up being like grant.
Nobody pays back. They just say it's our money.
And I don't want to mention the suspected levels of corruption in some of the investment transactions that were reportedly made, because they have not been able to do exactly what Hanki expects of the NEF. Because if the model of investment by the NEF and many other finance institutions was sustainably correct, because those businesses where it invests in would have repaid the money a long time ago. It means those businesses would have been profitable. It means those businesses would have been sustainable. And that, you see, the same way as you would have designed a NAFSAS kind of scheme. NAFSAS kind of scheme.
And then say to people, pay back what you've
greatly. A NAFSAS kind of scheme is designed on the proposition that we fund you now so that you study correct academia, so that you become a product that is employable and profitable, so that you can get a job and be able to refund, so that the next generation can get
Nobody's talking about that. Talking about free education means that's going to be out of the window, and that's going to go the same way where nobody pays back. We're going to come back to the audience to weigh in on this segment of business, right? And I always wondered, has business itself been sort of left off the hook, right, not to come to the party more seriously? Why is it that we have an economy is growing at 0%, but the business sector never carries the blame for it? right? It's all about government and the poor environment and what have you. But business seems, to always wash its hands and say, oh, well, there's policy uncertainty, so we're not going to bother. We're going to talk about that some more after the break. Of course, you can send us your own views on Twitter at JJ at Newsroom 405 and also on our WhatsApp line. Let's take a break now. Welcome back to our frank dialogue tonight on the economy and the budget. Because let's go straight into the audience now. If you can kick us off there, Duma. What do you make of this whole business interface with government to make things better?
Okay, with due respect, the people there are sugarcoating the issues. That small business ministry has been a total disaster.
Sure.
Firstly, and then the second thing is that the NEF hasn't got funding since 1996, so you can't blame the victim. No funding since inception, 1998, sorry. So the thing I want to say is that all the things that they're talking about, it's like shifting the chairs around the Titanic that is sinking. The things that are not really relevant to the issue at hand. The issue at hand is that in per capita terms, our economy has not grown for a decade.
Sure.
And the crisis has accelerated over the last 5 years. So, as Koketo said just now, the problem in our economy is one of aggregate demand. The reason why small businesses are closing down every day is that there is no demand in the economy. It's got nothing to do with regulations, as Thabo was saying. There is no income to support the businesses. And when the minister is withdrawing aggregate demand from the economy, he is making the situation worse. And I disagree with both of them. There was no balancing act for the minister to do. We've been in crisis for 10 years. There's only way out of it is to increase demand in the economy and stimulate spending so that we get the economy. The last thing I want to say is that the world economy, developing countries in the budget review, they're growing at 4.4% a year. We are not growing. We are one of the few developing countries that hasn't grown for a decade. And quite frankly, I don't understand what the two gentlemen are doing. They're not seeing the urgency of the situation that we are facing. And frankly, the finance minister, we need to get a social compact, as Kosatu was saying, to get our economy going again. Thank you.
So business doesn't think there's a crisis. Quick response to that before I go to leave.
No. I think Duma is correct to a large extent. There is no investment into the economy by the private sector. So the budget by the Minister of Finance would, if you listen to what yesterday the Premier of Gauteng Province said, the ideal, ambitious industrial plans and projects that they want to have.
10 sectors.
The 10 sectors, the smart cities. All those massive infrastructure investment are not going to happen in isolation. You need the private sector to invest in it so that it can create confidence in the economy so that you are able to, but before you do that, you need to obviously create an enabling environment to ensure that the private sector...
Sense of agency,
I think business is very, very cognizant that the fact that we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis as a country. That's why we're looking for solutions of then how do we then create jobs and create employment. Hence, we're saying let's focus. Let's choose a focused area. Let's choose, for example, small business, and say let's focus on small business development, and that on its own can then create jobs that we need for the country.
How come business never presents an alternative budget? So let's say unions, and so nobody listens to them. But I've never had business say, here's an alternative budget, because you've got CAs, you've got all these people, highly paid, actuarial scientists and what have you. Why do you think that's the case?
I think business has got an opportunity to engage with the minister and government. So we make our own inputs. Some of them they get taken, some of them they get ignored.
I think the unions don't. They also have access. They are in their alliance with the government. But they sort of give us, they present an alternative way to deal with the economy. Business does it well behind doors. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think maybe it's just a different mechanism of engagement. We engage it differently from...
It doesn't look like we've been listened to, if the NEF example is anything to go by. But anyway...
No, we do. I think we do. For example, let's look at the... we've been talking about the triple PFA.
Yeah.
Now we've got...
Oh my God, that's an old song. Did they do anything about it?
No, there's a bill now that is going to repeal the triple PFA. So we've been listening to. It may have taken long, but... we are listening to now and then.
Now and then, okay. We are thankful for small mercies.
So, JJ, yeah. I am absolutely gobsmacked, right, at the fact that you have two leaders in business here who are really tap dancing around the issues. I've got two bones to pick. So you said that the NEF is not directing investments into the right sectors.
Into black business.
I want you to tell me where you have seen a strategic document from this government that says to you, these are the sectors that we believe will grow this economy. This is what we're going to invest in them as a government. And this is how we are going to develop human capital, the skills, in the country through education to actually capacitate those sectors that we want to grow. It doesn't exist.
New growth path? The Minister of Economic Development spent a lot of years developing what's called a new growth path. It was a full industrial.
It was a new growth path to nothing, to hell. Because where's the growth? Where is the growth? It was really a document that was never implemented, and there's just nothing. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you look at what they call the Eastern Tigers, and you look at how they grew their economies. You cannot expect the private sector to do the government's job. The private sector doesn't exist to be warm and fuzzy and to take care of people. They're there to make a profit, right? And if they will do whatever it takes to make a profit. What we need is a central bank and a government that has a policy that directs investment into the correct sectors. Germany does it. China does it. America does it. Everybody who has a strong economy has a government that actually encourages and directs investments into the sectors that are going to create employment. Obama did it with his green energy, invested hundreds of millions into Tesla to make Tesla as successful as it is. We, as South Africa, expect the private sector to do what government should be doing, because actually, quite frankly, we've got cowards in government. We've got people who are scared to actually act because they don't know, or they fear investors that aren't coming to the table anyway. All right.
Okay, Tessa, any silver lining? Thabo here mentioned what the Premier of Gauteng mentioned. I thought he was quite focused and thorough on the economic front. Identifying 10 sectors. I don't know if it was brand new. They identified 10 sectors, identified corridors where these things are going to happen. It felt energized. What did you think?
So I think the point was well made before, that we need to prioritize. 10 is a lot. 10 is like many things in the economy. And I think that there isn't prioritization. When it comes to small businesses, something that was important about what was said in the budget was that the money is going to CEDA, not CIFA. It's going into the development part, but not necessarily cash in hand into the businesses, and not which businesses will be funded and who will be funded.
No, but the mandate of those organizations...
There's a spray and pray version.
But the CEDAs and so on are meant to give that money to the businesses.
No, so CEDA is there to develop businesses. It's there to give them skills. And one of the big complaints that small businesses have about, particularly CEDA, is that CEDA themselves don't have the skills to transfer. So CEDA has not been very effective in being able to capacitate businesses. And I think it's the overall problem around small businesses has been government's ineffectiveness, government's inability to do their job, inability to have a plan for how small businesses will be developed, the inability even to disperse the funds. The fact that the money is going back is because government doesn't know what they're doing. They don't have the capacity, the competency to do those things in small business that they need. And then you have small business people who want to do things, but are also in an environment where no one is helping them, supporting them. We have incubators up the wazoo in this country, but even the incubators don't have a good return. So the entrepreneur goes from one incubator to the next, waiting for a big break, as opposed to getting very specific skills to go into a very specific sector where they're going to actually thrive and have a market.
Okay, it sounds like we're in deep trouble when it comes to government simply supporting businesses to thrive in this economy?
Yes, we are in big trouble, JJ, particularly for small businesses. Because, I think the only people smiling from this budget in terms of, I'll just refer to this, in terms of what was done for businesses are big business. Because, you've got a whole, which is quite ironic, which says lowering the cost of doing business. Okay, it's 4.5 in the budget speech. Then in the end, he talks about spectrum licensing for ICASA. That's basically going to be freed up. That's relevant for big businesses largely. Okay. But when you look at the rest of this, he talks about the BIS portal and the CIPC registration, SARS, UIF, compensation fund. But nowhere in this is mentioned the barriers to entry that most small businesses face. So in South Africa, why we have oligopolies in virtually every single sector, 4 or 5 big players, is because the barriers to entry are simply high. Whatever you want to start, the regulatory burden is too much. And this is where I'm disappointed by the likes of your Black Business Council, because these are things that are tangible, things that can be done and taken up and taken to task. Because I'll give you an example. In the farming sector, you have to have an environmental impact assessment done. Okay. An environmental impact assessment, you're looking at anything from 300,000 to 400,000.
Seriously?
Yes, because it entails different parts. So it entails, the actual, them going to the Department of Environment, lodging the papers, and also with the local municipality. Then there's a public participation aspect. And then when there's a water rights thing that you must pay for water licensing. So such things, they seem very trivial, but they're quite difficult for small businesses, because what they're basically saying is that by the time you finish putting a transformer in from Eskom, which Eskom won't even let you become prepaid. They want you to basically, be a contract customer. So already that is putting an extra burden, because someone is saying, I'm a small business, I can only pay as I get money. And now you're saying, I don't care. You will pay fixed costs of 5,000 rands a month regardless of your usage, and also the water rights and the licensing. So that's what I'm saying, that in South Africa, this is the biggest problem we face. The regulatory burden in every sector. And if the minister was really serious about actually helping small businesses out, he would look at these things and say, let me look at all these acts and let me look at what extra regulatory burden it places on small business, and then offer an exemption to us as small businesses and say, look, if you're not turning over 10 million a year, 5 million a year, you're exempt from these things, so that people can then apply for exemption, and then we get the economy going. But unfortunately, that's not been done.
Quick response before we go to a break. Is there a focus on small businesses in something like the BBC? Do you have a department of small business or a wing that's dealing, because all these things seems to be quite serious and cannot just be brushed aside?
Yeah, well, like 60% or so of our members are small business. So we've got a very huge focus on small business, where the issues we're raising, for example, of water licenses, we've been engaging with the minister and related people to say, let's reduce the time it takes, because you're talking only on the cost part, but the time it takes to get a water license sometimes can take you more than a year. To do an EIA, it can take you longer. So by the time you start the actual business,
but have you addressed those kind of things in specific terms, Hanki?
Yes, those are the issues that we are addressing on a daily basis. Sometimes they take a little bit longer, but that's basically what consumes all our time, to say, how do we create an environment that says we are serious with small business, we are serious with the small business development, and we want them to thrive. Hence, because besides all those things, you need access to the market, and then you need access to funding. Because even if you have everything that you're talking about, if you don't have access to the market and access to funding, you may not be able to succeed. So we are focusing all the aspects that are affecting all small businesses in the country.
All right. We're going to talk a little more about that after the break. I want the unions to also lead us after the break on, what does all of this thing mean for the working class, right? And is there something we can do in terms of planning and so on? And that day, Padilo Hota will also be joining us there about the issue of planning. Does this budget reflect any sense of planning, or are we still stuck in a mode where we're just developing things as we go along? So you wake up and then there's a new treasury document. You wake up, today it's called as GISA, next minute is new growth path, and it's all the same, zero-sum game. Our frank dialogue continues after the break. welcome back to our frank dialogue tonight about the economy. One of the things that people worry about is whether or not there is a sense of long-term planning. We talk now about changing policies, changing goalposts, policy uncertainty, all the, these things find their way into our lexicon when we're talking about the economy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
No, thank you very much, Daddy. I think I have to start from the State of the Nation address and try to infer what targets in terms of growth, in terms of reduction of unemployment, in terms of inequality, and all those. The State of the Nation address said nothing around those. It was a litany of issues that didn't sum up to anything in terms of growth, in terms of reduction of unemployment, and poverty, which are the key things in the NDP. The Minister today of Finance, in discussing these issues, only talks about growth, which is 0.9% for the next 3 years. What are the implications of that? I thought he would touch on the implications of a 0.9% growth on unemployment in South Africa, because definitely it will increase unemployment. And he must say what is the growth plan for dealing with that unemployment. So this says nothing about the scares of 10 million people in South Africa that are unemployed now. 0.9% growth. And of course, the consolidation of the debt is actually reducing the investment that government has to make. It's usually 8%. So by taking away that 6%, or rather that the growth of 6%, it's lower than the 8% that has been there historically. The situation as we are now, it's worse than in 2018 when we were growing at 2%. So if you look at all the macro, and if you look at the macroeconomy, you cannot talk about growth without discussing employment. The Premier of Gauteng yesterday, in his very, very detailed program of action, said we will grow Gauteng by 3.1 million people, 3.1 million employees, or rather jobs. Watch me on that and hold me responsible for that. The Minister of Finance has nothing to be held to. Neither is the President. When we have a 10 million problem on the table, there cannot be a contractionary expansion. It's impossible. These are the things that are on the table that we have to be looking at. Well beyond corruption and the like, the macroeconomy has to be opened up so that we can deal with those macroeconomic problems of expansion to credit. It's not the matter of creating a state bank. It's a matter of expanding credit. This happened when we had all these banks in 2006 to 2008. Credit was expanded, growing at almost, it was at about 15%.
But what is the problem? Why is it that you are able to articulate all these things, right? And you were in this leadership of the bureaucracy for many years, right? Giving government the statistics that point to this kind of gaps, right? And why are we still in a situation where you still have to come and say, but they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Well,
it's frustrating, I'm sure, to the public to listen to this analysis always after this announcement by government.
It is very frustrating. I think there is a particular regulatory orientation instead of a developmental orientation in South Africa. And that regulatory orientation is tying all our hands. We need a developmental orientation in this country, so that when we talk to business and say, business, this is what we have to bring to the table, they understand that developmental orientation, but that is largely state-led. Because those things happened. Credit extension, investment led by government, all those things happened between 2004 to about 2008.
But don't the bureaucrats in Treasury know these things, Lee? Why is it that it always sounds like we now must give them an ABC on microeconomics every time they bring out a document, every time they bring out the budget?
I truly believe that the people in Treasury don't actually do the work. I think that they lean a lot on IMF, World Bank, and OECD documents. There is no internal planning within South Africa. You will hear that World Bank was here, IMF was here, there's this OECD document. So we're copying documents from countries that actually don't have our challenges. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in order to plan, you kind of have to have a strategy, a meta strategy, tactical plan, and then operational plans. As a government, we don't have, I will tell you, an industrial policy, right? We don't have an industrial policy that says these are the sectors that we want to target. And from that industrial plan, you will then have a plan for your education to say this is how we are going to structure our education so that we can meet the goals of our industrial plan. This is how we are going to keep our people healthy so that they can work.
But is that stuff not in the NDP somewhat in terms of developing a framework of long-term planning to 2030?
Let me tell you what my view of the NDP is. It's a document, a wish list, with no ending, no beginning, no targets. It's a wish list. It's a fantasy about where we want to be in 2030. It is not a plan. To call the NDP a plan is to actually insult a plan.
My goodness, Duma?
Yeah,
what is the problem?
Okay.
I want us to understand what is the problem. Is there a drought of ideas at the very core of our system, our bureaucracy?
You know what the statistician general was saying?
The
former was saying. It's actually it's music to my ears, you know, because we did grow at between almost 5% between 2004 and 2008.
Yeah.
So from March 2003 to December 2008, we created 3 million jobs. Why was that happening? It was because there was investment by the state, and the state had stopped the gear policies. So public investment was increasing at 16% a year, and that increased private investment by 12% a year. So public investment leads. So now back to the plan. I agree with Lee. That is not a plan, the National Development Plan. I've read many plans. If you read the Treasury documents, I've read every single budget review for 20 years. And I can tell you that the budget reviews of the last 10 years, they're all copy and paste of each other. This budget review is exactly the same as the one before and the year before. And then the other thing I want to say, a real plan has, China has had a plan for the past 4 decades. They've grown their economy at 9% a year for 4 decades. So you have a long-term plan. Usually it's to double the size of your economy every decade. And then within that you have a 5-year plan. And then within the 5-year, so Ethiopia, Rwanda, China, Vietnam, they all have this. So then you have a 5-year plan. Then you have a 1-year plan. So that is how the planning system works. And as they were saying, it looks at investment in infrastructure. It looks at investment in human capital. It looks at state capacity.
Yeah.
It looks at industrial policy. It has a structure. It has a vision
for the future structure. National Planning Commission.
Yes.
Don't they know this thing?
Yeah, it has a structure for agriculture, the division of industries between agriculture, industry and services, and within each of those agriculture, industry and services, it has a plan for each sector. So, and then the last thing it has is it has macroeconomic policy, and as Lee was saying earlier on, you use all the tools at your disposal. The central bank has to be part of it. Let me give you an example. The coronavirus, the central bank in China was giving funding to hospitals to help them counter the virus. So there is no reason why the central bank can't be involved in financing the development finance institutions, in finance, the land bank. Okay, so I've been trying to find from them that they don't provide statistics for farming funding for black farmers. They hide them behind transformational targets. So they're not providing funding for black farmers at the land bank, and I've been having this thing about that. But the point I'm trying to say, you have to use all your tools at your available, your fiscal policy, your monetary policy, towards that objection. And there's so many tools that we don't use as South Africa. Let me give you an example. We can use developmental windows. So we can say we're going to give credit to the banks at 3%. And if our priority is low-cost housing, they can lend it at 6%. So those are some of the tools that are used in the Asian countries that we are not using.
This sounds like a crisis. I'm going to ask the unions to lead us in the next segment about, what does all this stuff mean for the working class, in your view? And then the rest of the audience, I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell me What is the way? What needs to be done? The big question. What needs to be done right now? The budget has been put in place. Can we do something to influence maybe its amendment going forward in terms of the medium-term budget, or is it just a hopeless situation where we just have to suffer until the next government is elected? Let's take a break now. Right, it's hitting up here in Linden on your views, frank dialogue tonight about the economy. And our executive producer has just agreed to give us an extra 15 minutes so we can go just up to 10:15, just to make sure everybody has had their say. Now, the unions are saying it's a declaration of war, but we have had it all before, man. You know, they've had it all before. The next thing you'll be mobilizing your members to vote the same government into office again and so on. Please, can you tell me something that will give me hope that the power that you have as the working class or as the unions, right, can maybe take us into a different direction?
You see, it's better to create enemies than useless friends, as a matter of fact. We know that we are in a battle of a mother-father kind of crisis. I'm sharing with the colleague here that you're missing a point here. If we have got a government of ministers whom each and every minister who takes office brings his own policies, that's the beginning of crisis. You come in office, you change the stuff, you change the thinking. Where is the master plan, like the other colleague said? What is it that the 10-year, the plan is talking about? But to be critical, we raised an issue to assist the economy as the working people. We said, no. There is something like 6 trillion in the hands of asset managers. Our own money that must be used when we are old and sometimes when we are dead. We want the money to get into the market and start to sustain the current jobs and create other jobs. We were listening to the minister to speak on that particular aspect. He didn't say a word. And we are almost irritated with this issue of hiding nonsense behind transformation. Nonsense in the context of nonsense, not the other way around. Because all what we expect people to understand is that we are not made to be the way we are as a matter of choice. It's the situation. But we are not going to allow a situation where we must explain poverty to people. The very same business people, if you ask them, did you manage to explain to your employees what is it that they must expect if you don't pay them? Since you will be told that the procurement system will be changed, people will be paid on time, like you say. Today, I was speaking to workers who were working somewhere. They are saying, we are here, we were not paid for the past 3 months.
Sure.
And because this person is a contractor, when I call him to say, Mr. So-and-so, who are you? Then I find that it's a black man. Then what's going on with you and these employees who are parents? You know what matters most? Yeah. These people are parents. The question that you are raising to say you mobilize for the same government as the working people. Yeah. The unfortunate that we happen to be unfortunate to elect people who seem to be active at the time of a need. At the time of want. At the time of want. Yeah. But at the time of need, you find that the critical side you expected from this man is almost empty. Let me tell you, the sitting minister of finance, he has been there in the Reserve Bank for 20 years. Is these things that he's doing deliberately? From us as the working people, we are saying yes. And we wonder, who is he pleasing, if not us? But then yesterday, we asked a question to the citizen to say, in fact, what's going on in other individuals in the cabinet? He said, powers to appoint ministers is a prerogative power to an office. Then it goes back to the issue of a mother-father war. There is no way in which you can expect an environment to be normal where the mother looks to the father to say, I'm just watching the space. He sleeps, I cut her off. You get it? But to conclude on this point of job creation, the narrative of corporate tax vis-a-vis, we have seen more than 760,000 jobs being shared in the mining industry. As we speak now, from 100 we are within 340 somewhere there.
Yeah.
You go to construction since 2010, your Group 5, your Marian Robert, you mentioned them. Upon realization that they defaulted tax and other rules, they paid, then they said, your government wanted us to give them money, now off we go. The comrades are unemployed. You must understand that the economy of South Africa is ideologic. Immediately you bring your metrics here and you become economically like academical. You leave back the idea. You are in trouble because, I repeat, he who plays the tune pays the piper. Whose money is the money that the minister was distributing? Is it not the money collected from the taxpayers? We're giving a directive. We are saying, take all our asset monies in the asset managers, circulate the money in our economy. Make this, the working people now are saying, let's take control of our own monies. We know what happened in the PIC. Our monies were given to Steinhoff and others. Wherever they invested that particular money, they were written off to companies that are dominated by the very same minority who are dominant insofar as the economic power is concerned.
Okay, this sounds like quite apart from a broken record, of complaints each time a budget is put on the table. But it also demonstrates a poor consensus, even amongst friends. Talking about friends and enemies. But here are unions who are friends to the government, friends to the Communist Party, even if that doesn't mean much on any day, right? But there's a tripartite alliance that seems not to be at one about what needs to be done for the economy. Is that part of the difficulty, that you've got various parts of the same ruling party pulling in different directions and arriving at naught?
No, I think there is nothing on the table that any of the political parties provide to say South Africa will move in the particular direction. And there is nothing to hold them accountable to that. There is absolutely intellectual, the whole thing is so intellectually barren that there is not much that we can gather from any one of the political parties in as far as economic policy is concerned. Or any policy in terms of that discourse taking place and having proved ahead of time that this thing will deliver. Unless we get back to that, we are not going to go anywhere, because
always
there's nothing. There's really nothing. There's absolutely nothing. So there's no economic policy from the process of. So the democracy is very hollow. It cannot deliver because there's nothing at the center of any party that says, in as far as jobs are concerned, we'll generate 5 million jobs in X time. What they say is we'll address jobs. And that was what the president was saying. That was what...
But he gave a number last year.
No, it was 200,000 jobs over 200,000 a year, and that will give us 2 million jobs.
Yeah.
The Minister of Finance said it's 100,000 in his policy document. Yeah. So did the minister discuss with the president on this particular issue, which is a burning platform? Now, of course, 100,000 women entrepreneurs. What does that mean? What will happen when we have done all that? Is it going to give us 10 million jobs? Is it going to give us any? Those are the targets that we want on the table. Because only when we have those, you can hold politicians to account. And they can see the seriousness and the hollowness of the planning systems, and I think we can do better.
You think the unions can push back, right, if they were slightly independent, right, in terms of the thinking of where we must go?
No, I think you need a technocracy that is competent and that is sympathetic to the situation in South Africa. There is neither competence nor sympathy in this whole thing. This is the problem.
So what must be done? Now, our kick us off there. What needs to be done? Because there's a lot of lamentation, correctly so, because if the lament is what you see, then you must lament. But what must be done? I mean, surely in this country there's so much talent and ideas. I mean, you just listen to this room, right? Is there a way in which government maybe does not invite the intellectual capacity in the country to try and move us forward. What needs to be done, Gugis?
I think there's no political will, quite frankly, JJ, to invite people to come up with ideas. I mean, what people have been saying tonight is actually that government doesn't actually want to get to the heart of the problem. So you take, for instance, the budget, the finance minister's speech. He speaks about, which is rather ominous for Eskom, 4.21. He says electricity. Okay, so he speaks about SOEs here, but he doesn't mention Eskom. So I don't know what's going to happen, because we only know there's one company that generates electricity, and that's Eskom. But he then mentions the whole IPPs, which we've been told time and time again that these people are overcharging Eskom. This is why Eskom is finding itself in this problem. IPPs are overcharging Eskom per unit of electricity that's generated, and then even the coal people are also overcharging Eskom. But there's simply nothing mentioned about addressing these coal contracts that are problematic, that are draining Eskom. And then we also have South African Airways. Okay, so in South African Airways, it's interesting that they speak about the airline, but they don't actually mention the fact that we've heard some damning allegations now in the State Capture Commission now about how these pilots are overpaid. So quite frankly, the pilots are overpaid and the perks are hectic, and this is draining SAA. There's no speaking about that. Then we go to PRASA. It's under rail, but it only has even 3 lines. I kid you not. All it just says is that there's an economic regulation of transport bill in November. This is for PRASA, which is in charge of transporting millions of South Africans on a daily basis. And we know that it's continually riddled with problems where trains are getting burnt. Okay, so there's some level of economic sabotage happening there, but there's no mention of such to say, you know what, this rail system is failing. It's simply failing to transport people, and people are burning carriages. There's economic sabotage. What are we going to do about that? There's a case of cable theft. That's also a level of economic sabotage. So I just feel like the minister, when it comes to these SOEs, and that's why I agree with people who say that this public enterprises ministry must actually be dissolved into smaller ministries. So, for instance, like every ministry, like SAA should go into the Department of Transport, various ministries, because it's almost like a super ministry with over 700 SOEs, and they can't keep track of all of them and what they're doing. And as a result, there's a lot of people who are taking advantage of that. You've got the issue of Evergreen Contracts. You don't hear this being discussed. You've got people who've been having contracts with government for the past 30, 40 years, things that were negotiated way back in the early 90s, that have now simply are not feasible. We complain that South Africa is a poor country and there's no money, but there is money. But how is that money spent? Who's getting that lion's share? How is that money divvied up? This is what's worrying.
We're going to continue after that, after the break, but the issue now, I want you guys to just tell me what needs to be done. And also, why do you think that if you say there's no political will, can that really be the reality? I mean, all of these people, when they talk on platforms, they've just emerged out of an election. It's not even 8 months, right? And the country has chosen their own government, and so is it a question of the government that we deserve, the pain that we deserve, or not? Let's take a break now. All right, if you've just joined us, you missed an hour and a half with frank dialogue on the state of the economy and the budget. But of course, you can always find it on our YouTube channel, and of course on DSTV. Catch up if you want to know what people have been saying. But 15 more minutes of roundup. Now I just want solutions now, guys. Right, Tessa, what needs to be done?
So, fun fact, I'm on the National Planning Commission, so I can answer some of the questions that have been asked.
You're saying must dissolve it?
No, I'm on it.
Oh, you're on it?
Yeah, we can also dissolve it, but I'm on it.
What the hell does it do?
This is a very good question, and that's part of the problem. And so I'm going to say things that might get me into trouble, but hey, here we go.
Sure.
The first thing is the question about prioritization. The National Development Plan, very rightly so, is not meant to be a plan in earnest. It's meant to be a vision that gives a long-term framework that was meant to be taken in by the state and other actors and developed into plans, into the 5-year plans. We have MTSFs that have not been aligned to the National Development Plan for now 3 cycles in. So we have NTSF, you look at the MTSF, it's got 1,000 1,300 indicators. Those indicators don't match what's in the National Development Plan. There's no political will to implement the plan. Then you have what's the framework for planning, what's the framework. So you have a National Development Plan that's, by the way, that's not full-time. It's part-time.
Sure.
So a commission that's...
All the commissioners
are part-time. But you also have DPME that's supposed to have a planning unit within it. But you also have presidency that has also got its own
and monitoring
planning.
and evaluation.
So there are too many chefs in the kitchen. So then the planning commission. So we've put out a youth strategy, a youth unemployment strategy that we've done research on for a matter of 2 years. Put that out. Where is that going? Who is going to implement it? How is it going to end up going anywhere? We don't have answers for those questions. There is a just transitions plan that has been put out by the Planning Commission. There is an energy document that has been put out 2 years ago by the Planning Commission. There isn't anywhere that can go to, and there isn't a real clear understanding of how to translate the National Development Plan into actual working documents in government. And until you do that, there's nothing that you can do. Even the budget itself, and we've made this point time and time again, is not aligned to the National Development Plan. It's all done in lip service. So you'll see, if you read the long document, you'll see a kind of, the NDP says, but not an actual...
Some cursory reference.
Yeah. So you had, but I think it was 2 years ago, where we had Minister Dlamini Zuma, who was saying that now we have a budget mandate paper. That budget mandate paper was supposed to be giving a prioritization, which is the other big issue. We have not prioritized from 5 years to 5 years what it is that we're going to do in this 5 years. So you can't have a target that's at 2030, but you don't know what your 5-year milestones are. Yeah. You have to have that in place. And then the last thing, and Tabane said it earlier, and it's important, the capacity of the state to deliver. The only thing that heartens me about the idea that we're looking at the rationalization of the state is because I am fully convinced that there are many people who are in the employ of the state who do nothing.
Who are dead wood.
Who are dead wood. And we need to figure out where that is. That's the only thing that's heartening for me about it, is that I would rather have a smaller state that is functional than a bigger state that is not delivering and is spending over what it should and over what it can afford on human capital.
Sounds like doom and gloom. Thabo? No, take that. I don't think your thing is working. Yeah.
What needs to be done? All right? In conclusion, one of the first propositions I'm going to make is that the first thing that we need to do is to avoid to have what we call this patriotic dishonesty.
Patriotic dishonesty?
Yes. This is what I mean. At the risk of sounding like I'm defending government, one of the things that I'm going to say, and in all fairness, for an example, you couldn't have expected the Minister of Finance today to go into detail in some of these expenditure line items. Departments and ministries are going to do that over the next few weeks. All he needed to do is to obviously make those punchlines in terms of what the direction of the investments and the commitments of the monetary fiscal is. If you look at what my colleague, the lady there said, and you go with that narrative, then there's something that means, JJ. It means that there's a division in the DTI called the IDD. It's called the Industrial Development Division. It means that division is useless and no one is doing anything there.
Yeah.
To say that there is no
plan, that there's no industrial plan.
No, to say that there is no industrial plan in this country is not only incorrect, it's also dishonest, because there is. Perhaps what is not there is how that plan is coordinated to drive various investment in the different aspects of the economy. If there's one thing I will accept and agree with the colleagues on, is that there's a lack of decisive business continuity in government. So what usually happens every 5 years, a new minister comes in, commences on the basis, on the premise as if the previous minister has not done anything.
Yeah.
And therefore that loses, some work loses either momentum or prioritization.
Yeah. I
cannot buy into the narrative that, and I refuse to do so, into a narrative that says the private sector has no social, economic, moral obligation and responsibility to invest in this economy. For an example, you cannot expect this economy to grow in the manner that we expect it to grow when it excludes majority of its citizens. The framework and the paradigm for transformation needs to be prioritized and escalated to the highest level of the private sector and in government. If you look at the BEE framework and all other transformation interventions, there is no private sector commitment to ensure that all the excluded sections of the community and the society are included so that you facilitate what is called inclusive growth. And lastly, what the Minister of Finance did today, and I think Untitled Chapter is correct, the capacity of the state and government to be able to close the leaks, the fiscal leaks, is very critical. Let's use the analogy of a football team. You cannot expect the Minister of Finance and the Presidency and all other leaders of government being the strikers, continuing to score goals against the opposition being inequality, unemployment and poverty. And yet the defense at the back is leaking goals. Because when the defense at the back is leaking goals, through corruption, irregular and unexplained expenditure, therefore we are actually moving one step forward and 3 steps backward.
All right.
So that's a crisis that we're having. And I think until we deal with the capacity of the state to be able to close the fiscal leaks and be able to create an environment where the private sector can ensure that the excluded majority of our people, which are black people in this country, are part and parcel of these economies, we can then be able to have inclusive growth.
Hangi, thank you. What's your way forward?
Trying to come up with solutions. The biggest issue for me is lack of ability to implement. Because the minister spoke about, for example, the cutting of the wage bill, cutting 160 billion over the next 3 years. Is that going to be implemented? That's the first thing. Because you need the political will to implement that and to achieve that. And you can achieve it through not necessarily retrenching people. You can at least cap the salary increases to a certain level. But for me, the biggest issue is implementation. We've been having so many policies. We had GEAR, we have IPEP. I think there's an industrial policy in the country. We had RDP. The issue for us is that have we ever done an impact analysis of those policies?
Each of those policies. We just changed their name.
If they have been implemented. So, for example, the State Bank is not a bad idea. It's a good idea because the current financial institutions are not friendly to small businesses and the people on the ground. But again, implementation.
Bank, CSA, IDC. Those were supposed to be funding institutions.
Yeah, implementation. And I think the other issue is the Sovereign Wealth Fund. We're talking about it now. It's a good idea that we need to, during the days when we are still fine, we need to save for the rainy days. But again, it's the implementation.
All right.
Let's stick to implementation.
All right, let's leave it there. 30 seconds each, your last word.
Okay, I just want to clear up. We do not have an industrial policy.
Okay.
First of all, the industrial policy says nothing about the most important sectors of the economy. It says nothing about mining. It says nothing about banking. It says nothing about retail. It doesn't even say anything about the majority of manufacturing sectors. Secondly, the industrial policy does not have a budget. I once, a few years ago, tried to add up all the money that is spent on the industrial plan. It was less than 0.5% of GDP. Now, if you look at a real industrial plan, it has a budget and it has policy tools that go beyond the budget, that involve interest rates, that involve preferential credits, that involve the central bank, and so forth. So please, do not tell me that we have an industrial plan. It is completely incorrect. I've been through that thing many times. It is not there.
All right, Lee, briefly.
What we need is an industrial plan that is coordinated with all the sectors of the economy. If you go into the streets in Pretoria and you ask the lady that's selling you tomatoes, what is the industrial plan, what is South Africa's investment priorities, she should be able to tell you. Something that sits in some department somewhere that nobody else knows about is not a plan, it is a fantasy.
All right.
I think it's been well said. You really need a technocracy that can plan. That predictably you can know where you're going. Anything that is shoddily put up, described and then prescribed is not a plan. A plan is something that is predictable, and when you are able to predict, then you can actually prescribe. If you are not able to predict anything And the test, the acid test, is for the president to say, I'll create X number of jobs in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
The minister must be able to say, I will raise growth to this level. Based on that, we must test how predictable what they say is. If it's not predictable and they are afraid to say so, then there's no plan. We must go back and do serious planning to get this country out of the morass in which it is. And fortunately, it is still very rich and very rich.
All right. Let's thank our panel. Please, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you who have made and really your sharp minds. I'm not sure why they are not being harvested to make sure that this country can move forward. But, you know, you can only do so much being outside, pointing inside. Thank you so much for joining us for this dialogue. Of course, like I said, you can find it on our YouTube channel. It should be up on our social media tomorrow. But also you can catch highlights of it on our DSTV catch-up and on our highlights show at the weekend. Thank you so much. And we will now wait to get into the Africa Roundtable straight after the break.